go ahead and get started. So obviously today is the last day, and so the plan is to kind of go through the lecture, obviously, as we normally do. This will probably go a little bit quicker than normal. Then after that, obviously you can go ahead and take the quiz, or you can wait until Monday. But I know that some of you are planning on taking the final potentially. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set aside a little bit of time today for you to, after I sort of finish, to communicate with me. We can either do it via Zoom, or we can do it via email or whatever, so that you can figure out, okay, what grade you have and whether or not you plan to take the final, all that sort of stuff, okay? All right, so let's sort of jump into this. So the general topic predominantly for today is all about ground leases. Again? Can you guys hear me or not out in Zoom?
The one thing is muted.
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, all right. Okay, so ground leases. First of all, what are they? All right, so in a lot of cases, you will have individuals, organizations, governments, schools, whatever, that own land, and maybe have owned land for very long periods of time, and for whatever reason, they don't want to sell the land, okay? But they want to put the land to a productive use, okay? In other words, they don't want the land necessarily just sitting there and nothing being built on it, nothing being used, and that sort of thing, but yeah, they don't want to give up the land. And there are some very rational reasons maybe for, not wanting to get rid of the land, because then you, as the owner, maybe lose control, okay, over what may happen in the future. So take for example, a college campus. It is not uncommon, especially for, state and private universities for that matter, to say, hey, we have some land on our campus where we want to have maybe a parking garage built, or we want to have some dorms built. But we, as the university, let's say, don't really want to come up with the money to actually build the parking garage, or actually build the dorms, and maybe even operate the dorms or the parking garage. And so I have seen over a number of years, universities basically, as one kind of form of this, say, okay, what we'll do is we'll, in essence, solicit bids to potentially anyone that's interested to build a parking garage or to build dorms on land that we own as a university. Okay, does that make sense? Now, what happens is the university will maybe set aside this land and say, all right, build the parking garage, build the dorms, and then the arrangement can take on a variety of different forms. In some cases, what will happen is the university will take a very hands-off approach and say, okay, we want a 500-unit dorm built on our campus on this piece of land. You, developer, go out there, build that, and operate it as, in essence, a private sort of sector venture. We aren't really going to control anything as the university. We might set some boundaries on, okay, what's the maximum amount maybe you could charge per room, or some sort of boundaries, possibly. But for the most part, it's in the developer's control as to what they build and so forth. And then they would, in essence, operate it maybe for the next 25, 30 years. And then at that point, what could happen is then any improvements that have been made to that property in terms of a dorm or a parking garage or whatever else it might be, would then revert back to the university. So in other words, after 30 years, the university or whoever the landowner is would get the improvements basically back to them, and they would now own that. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, that's not always going to be the case. In some cases, you'll have, in essence, a perpetual sort of land lease or ground lease where, you know, that literally every 20 years or every 50 years or every 100 years or whatever it might be, you go through a renewal process of that lease, and then maybe it's repriced, okay, based upon what maybe the value of the land is at that particular point in time. So for example, you know, you might start off with a ground lease with a fixed payment for the first 10 years of the lease. Okay, during that 10 years, you've built whatever it is that you're building on that land. And it doesn't have to be what I just described in terms of dorms for a university or a parking garage for a university. It can be shopping centers, it can be office buildings, it can be anything, okay? So it's not like you're limited in terms of, in essence, what you can actually build on the property. That's really going to be dictated by the owner of the property and obviously local government regulations. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Now, as I was saying, you could have this kind of perpetual sort of ground lease where, like as I said, every 10 years you kind of renegotiate. So maybe you start off with $100,000 a year as your ground lease payment for the first 10 years, and then at the end of 10 years, an independent third-party kind of appraiser would sort of come in and say, hey, you know, what have basically land values done within this area, you know, over the past several years? What do we anticipate the value is going to be in the next several years? So we reprice basically that ground lease. Now, probably 9 times out of 10, that's going to mean an escalation, you know, in the cost of that ground lease. So you might go from having paid $100,000 a year for the ground lease to maybe for the next 10 years you're paying $125,000 for the ground lease. I mean, that's, you know, obviously a 25% increase, you know, in whatever that price point is for that ground lease. But it doesn't have to be necessarily done that way. It can also be done with predetermined kind of adjustments, kind of a stair-step sort of thing that you could say, all right, for the first 10 years, yeah, it's going to be $100,000, and then it's going to automatically go up 5% for the next 10 years. And then after that, it's going to go up another 5%. And you could stipulate that in the lease arrangement as well. So you've got a lot of, I mean, pretty much almost infinite flexibility as to how you do this. But the point still comes back to, you know, the owners of the land are doing this, as I said, in many cases so they don't lose control. I mean, think about it like this. If the university just simply sold the land to somebody for a parking garage, or sold the land for somebody to build, obviously, dorms, you know, and that might be fine for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, but you think about universities, some of which have been around for hundreds of years, you know, you don't necessarily want to start giving away or selling off this land, and then 30 years from now, you're sort of saying, well, I no longer need that kind of dorm, or I don't necessarily need that kind of parking garage, or whatever it might be, and you want the control of being able to do what you want to at some point in the future. I mean, does that make sense? Okay. Now, as I said, a lot of government entities get into this. You've got even Indian tribes, obviously, that will, in some cases, do ground leases for casinos. You've got, you know, a whole number of different, like railroads. That's another thing that a lot of you don't realize. That whenever railroads were expanding across the country, one of the things that the federal government did to encourage the railroads and to partially compensate them for that expansion across the country was to give them land. And they gave them a lot of land, okay? In some cases, I mean, actually, you can Google this for yourself. You look up some of the different railroads and look at land ownership. Some of these railroad companies to this day still own literally millions of acres of land across the country. Some of which is out in the middle of nowhere, you know, in essence, kind of sort of worthless. but they still own a lot of land in urban areas. And in many cases, the railroad, they still have to pay property taxes, so, on that land. So it's not like, that they have the land free and clear and they don't have to pay any sort of holding cost. But what many of the road companies are sort of doing, they just sort of sit and they just hold this land. And if you look in a lot of communities, you will have large parcels of land owned by railroads that in essence, are doing nothing with the land. They're just sitting on it. And you try to approach them to say, hey, I want to buy your land. In many cases, the railroads will say, not really interested. But they are interested, almost in every single circumstance, of doing ground leases. Because to them, that's just like found money, okay? That you find a parcel that may be owned by a railroad in a really nice, desirable area, and you may have the railroad company willing to do this long-term ground lease with you for literally pennies on the dollar relative to what you might expect from other property owners, okay? Not always. That's not to say that the railroad companies aren't sophisticated, aren't really paying attention and that sort of thing, but their perspective is very different because they're looking in some cases, once again, across the entire country, this portfolio, and sometimes it's almost a path of least resistance with them of just simply saying, okay, somebody's willing to give us $10,000 a year for this piece of land that we've really gotten no interest on in the past 20, 30 years. That's wonderful. We'll do that. So, this is one of those sorts of things that, that this is another sort of opportunity area that a lot of people don't even think about. Because embedded within our minds, especially those of us that, sort of, grew up here, in the country, in the U.S., most of us have this embedded mind of, if you don't own it, it's not yours, kind of thing, or, and somehow that's a bad thing to be someone leasing something, and not owning it. Let me break something for a moment with this. You never really, truly, completely, ever own anything, okay? Especially real estate, okay? Because even if you go out, you pay cash money for a piece of land, or a house, or a building, or whatever, what do you still have to do every single year? You got to pay property taxes, okay? Now you're saying, well, yeah, that's not really, ownership or whatever, but what happens if you don't pay those property taxes?
They'll come after you.
They'll come after you. They have the right to sell the property, okay? I have actually this past week bought a couple of properties in some property tax foreclosure sales in Texas, and perfect case in point. You have people who didn't pay their property taxes for the past 5, 10, 15 years in some cases, and so what happens is the local taxing authority says, hey, we're tired of you not paying your taxes, we're going to auction this property off, and if you're interested, you can come in and potentially bid in the process as the owner, but we're going to open it up to the general public, and the highest bidder walks away with your property. Now, in this particular instance, in Texas, not to get into all of the nitty-gritty details, but in Texas they have what's called kind of a right of redemption period, so that if I buy your property, and you haven't paid property taxes on it, but I buy the property in a property tax auction, you as the owner of the property can technically reclaim the property within 6 months, but you've got to buy me out and pay me a 25% premium above and beyond what I paid for the property, and you have to pay any and all costs that I incurred during the ownership of that property during that 6 months. So for example, if I go out like I did this past week on one of the properties that I bought, I hired somebody to go run a tractor, clear the brush out and so forth, paid several $100s to have that done. Well, that's one of the expenses that obviously I incurred during the ownership period. Now if somebody comes back and says, hey, I want to reclaim that property, they're going to have to pay that expense. Okay, does that make sense? But all of this, my point when sort of conveying that is you never really own whatever it is that you think you own. So you've got to kind of break this mindset of just because you are the owner does not mean you are going to be the owner forever once you've made that payment. You know, it's not like buying, you know, some sort of asset like a chair or a table where, yeah, once you buy it, you own it, you know, you control it completely, that sort of thing. But with real estate, you know, if you don't pay, obviously, your property taxes, there's a very good chance you're going to get foreclosed on, you're going to lose that property. Does that make sense? Okay? So this whole ground lease thing.
Doctor?
Yep. Question?
No, I just had a quick question about what you were talking about with the tax thing. You know, if you bought a property, you know, through that, wouldn't, if there was a mortgage on that property, isn't there, you know, going to be a lien on there from that?
No, okay. Excellent question. That is why that whenever the property tax sales takes place, the lender, if there is one, is notified of the sale, and they are going to be the first in line to try to buy the property for up to the amount that they obviously have invested in the property by virtue of any sort of loan they have outstanding on the property. Okay? And so in other words, if there's a, let's say a $30,000 loan on the property, that lender, in essence, is going to bid up to $30,000 so they don't lose that, basically, position, because otherwise, whoever the owner or the purchaser is would, in essence, take priority over their lien.
But like if you buy, let's say you bid 40,000 and the lender has 30,000, do you have to give 30,000 to the lender?
No. Okay, so in other words, the lender will ultimately be cut out. That's why they're almost always going to be the ones to potentially. Now what may happen is in some cases, depending on the structure, the property tax authority may convey part of the proceeds to the lender. Okay.
Question, Dr. Foggy?
Yep.
On that scenario you just explained, with the lien holder and the tax, will the lien property owner through the tax lien? That works in different states because some states, it don't matter what happens, the lien still stays until you clarify it with the lender.
Yeah. But once again, every state, yeah, I agree. Every state is different. That's why you've got to be obviously completely familiar with what that specific state will allow or not allow, and who takes priority and what liens you're going to be subject to. But in the case of a lot of these property tax foreclosures, they're not necessarily going to be properties with loans. Most of them, once again, the person bought the property, they paid for the property, in essence, for whatever reason, like in the case of a couple of properties that I bought, the owners of the property have been dead for over 20-something years, and so the property taxes literally have not been paid in the past 20 years. They owned the properties free and clear, but in essence, the taxing authority just said, hey, okay, we've waited 20 years, we might as well get something out of this as opposed to nothing, so let's auction off the properties. And so what actually happens in that particular instance is all of these properties where you've had delinquent taxes, every single county, now once again this is in Texas, I don't want to try to bore you with Texas stories, but in Texas the way that it works is the first Tuesday of every month you have auctions on the courthouse steps. So you've got 250 something counties in Texas. Every single one of those counties is having a property tax sort of sale the first Tuesday of every month. And so in this particular county, they had probably about 30 properties that were raw land, in some cases houses, and so forth. And then in this particular location, they had about 35 or so bidders that showed up. And then ultimately they bid against each other. The high bid obviously walks away with the property. But kind of an interesting part to the story, not to get too far off into, once again, the details, it's kind of more of a personal story, but so in this particular instance, the way that it works in Texas, you've got to pay cash that day or with a cashier's check. And it's not necessarily, they don't give you a whole lot of time. In this particular location, it was kind of out in the country. There wasn't a bank for like 30 miles. So literally, everybody had to pretty much bring cash. So I'm walking around in this particular instance, about $24,000 in cash in my pocket, literally, waiting to bid on a couple of these properties. And so you go in, and then once again, after everything is done, you're standing there counting out $100 bills to basically the county clerk. So it's kind of an interesting little weird sideline of the thing. Anyway, getting back specifically to this whole idea of kind of ground leases is that, I mean, if you think about it, there are all sorts of entities out there that own land. As I mentioned, you could have nonprofit organizations, could be churches, you could have schools, universities, you could have local governments, state governments, federal government, you could have all kinds of, once again, tribal sort of lands, you could have, I mean, it's just almost, it's mind-blowing whenever you really think about all the different types of entities out there that may own large swaths of land that, for them, this is an opportunity basically to generate some free and clear cash flow without necessarily having to do a whole lot other than simply give their approval to have something built on the land. And
what was this, where the Sony Ericsson was? Where the Miami,
I'm sorry?
the Miami Open, that land in Key Biscayne it is? They lost that ground. Was that something like a ground lease?
I'm not specifically familiar with that particular instance, but it's very possible.
They had for years and years, they had it Miami Open there, and then for some reason, I think the population complained about it, but it was something.
Talking ground lease, it's possible, I don't know.
You mentioned about the tribe, like for instance, like the Seminole tribe. They're
Yep.
their own, like they're almost their own country.
Their own nation,
Right.
Literally.
So how does that?
within a nation.
How does that work on the property taxes and all that? Do they do the same?
No, they don't pay property taxes.
But if I bought land in their,
In many cases, you're gonna be exempt. You're never gonna be able to buy land in their, you're gonna be able to ground lease.
okay.
Because, once again, they're not gonna sell the land. And so this also gets into an interesting little tax issue and dilemma, because, like, for example, a private university like Nova is exempt from paying property taxes, as is a church, as is, a whole number of nonprofit entities. If you own land as a nonprofit entity, typically you do not pay property taxes on the land or the buildings that are on your land, if they are in direct service to your mission, okay? So that's where, if you depart too far away from your core mission, then it could be taxable. But and that's, once again, those are legal, distinctions that can get very gray and very complicated depending on the specific circumstances. But that also can be an advantage for the person actually building, let's say, a dorm, is that they may not have to then pay property taxes on that land. So they're operating, in one sense, at a distinct advantage relative to someone that might buy land literally across the street that's privately owned land, that they're going to have to maybe pay more for the land, and they're going to pay property taxes, and they're going to be in direct competition with somebody that basically is on, let's say, university land or government land or whatever it might be, where they're not going to pay property taxes. Okay, make sense?
Professor Cook.
Yep.
Professor Cook. And also, ground leases are usually used in partnership with government entities, because we all want to be developers here. So when we're developing, I've noticed that CIA will do partnership developments. That's how we would put a development project. We'll do the ground lease for 30 years, and we have to come up with the numbers for construction to win the bid. So But is that what they're talking about, that they're gonna give you the ground, they're leasing the land to develop it for them? And then you still pay, I guess you still get a percentage off the taxes you pay, but I remember one of the statements have been that they're lying, where they just put $1 back to the ground for 30 years, and the CI gave them the land and they built the stadium on that. Is that the same kind of concept?
Yeah, you're kind of breaking up a little bit. It's hard to understand precisely what you're saying, but the general gist of what I'm hearing, that yes, that sounds like an example. Yes. Okay. All right.
No, I'm sorry if
I'm sorry, Jim. Okay.
I'm sorry if I'm breaking up already. I'm
Okay.
sorry if I'm breaking up.
Well,
Not really.
all right. Can you guys okay? Here in the room, we can it's very muffled what you're saying. What about out there in Zoom land? Are you guys able to understand what Jim is saying?
Yeah.
You are? Okay.
The last part you said, you was just apologizing for breaking up.
Oh, okay. I mean, the folks here in the room will testify. We can't understand what he's saying, but you guys obviously are able to hear him. So I don't know what the deal is. I can hear you great, Adam. So I don't know. Go figure. Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments before we get into some computations on this? Nobody? No questions? No comments? No observations? Nothing? Okay. Okay, so the way that to sort of kind of approach this, we'll start off an example of a ground lease payment using discounted cash flow. All right. So once again, the financial mathematics or the way in which we're going to approach this today, there's really nothing new in a sense, other than it's just kind of an application. Okay. So for the most part, you're going to sort of say, oh, I know how to do this. Well, yeah, because we've probably done a half a dozen or more problems like this. But here's, in this particular context, let's say that we've got a ground lease, and how many years do we want this ground lease to run? Give me a number. 20 years. All right? And in this particular case, let's say that from years 1 through 10, we're going to have one sort of dollar amount payment, and then years basically 11 to 20, some other dollar amount payment. So give me a dollar amount for the ground lease.
Monthly?
And this is per
In
square
most,
foot?
this is also kind of an interesting thing. Ground leases can be done monthly, but then also in some cases they're just done annually. You make one lump sum payment once a year, you're done.
And this is a price per square foot, or?
It doesn't matter. I mean, once again, it's just a dollar amount. It could be a price per square foot, could be just a set dollar amount, whatever you want it to be. So let's just say $1 million. All right, so for the first 10 years, you've got a ground lease payment of $1 million a year. Okay, make sense, everybody? Nothing complicated there. All right. Then let's just say that after 10 years, it goes up to, I don't know, $1.5 million. Big jump, 50% jump, but could happen. All right. So my question to you would then be, what is, in essence, the value of that ground lease to the owner of the property, assuming, let's say, a 7% discount rate? Okay? All right, so see if you can figure it out on your own, because you're obviously going to have to do so.
Cash flow?
So you're going to do it as a cash flow. All right? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to see if you can do it on your own.
am I calculating the value for the
You're calculating the value of the ground lease to the owner of the
to the
property.
owner?
Okay, when you think you have an answer, let me know.
The 12.3 million.
How much?
That's what I have. Huh.
Okay, somebody, it sounds like you got independent verification, so let's just see. All right, so we're going to start out one payment per year. Then we're going to have 0 as our initial cash flow at time period 0. Then we're going to have 1 million as a cash flow. Oops. For 10 years. Then we're going to have 1.5 million as a cash flow for another 10 years. Then we're going to put in the 7% discount rate, and then basically solve for net present value. Okay, so let's see what we get. Okay, and what do you get?
$12,369,230, 59 cents. 60 cents.
Yep, rounded. Yep. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we can complicate this up a little bit if we want to. And let's say that we want to put some sort, after that 20 years, we want to put some sort of a terminal value on the land. In other words, kind of in the event that we maybe want to sell it, or in the event that we just simply want to place a value on it, kind of a revaluation, if you will, of the land at the end of 20 years. So let's just say that we put a terminal value on this. At end of year 20 of, let's say, 15 million. Okay, how does that change things? Okay, so in terms of our calculations over here, what would we change?
1.5 plus.
The last number.
Yep, but we've got to, in essence, kind of redo it. So you're going to have the 1.5 million for what?
9 years.
9 years.
9 years.
Yep. And then the final cash flow will be 1.5 million plus 15 million okay. Whatever that equals will be our final cash flow. Oops. And then from there, same thing, 7% interest rate, and then solve for net present value. Okay, so let's just kind of see if we can sort of do that. Let's scoot this over here a little bit. All right, let's redo it again. and we end up with what? Okay, 16,255,515.64. Okay, just double check. Anybody else confirm that?
Okay.
I'll go one more time just to double
Yeah,
check.
that's what
Just make sure I didn't go too fast.
that's what I got to.
Yep, okay. All right. Everybody good? Okay, any questions on that? All right, pretty straightforward. Okay, so that approach is basically using, you know, a discounted cash flow, obviously a discount rate to come up with what the value of the land would be for the owner of the property. Now, another way to approach this is basically just to use the cap rate, okay? And to say, all right, I have someone that is willing to pay, let's say, $100,000 a month for a ground lease, okay? And so we convert that to annual. We get what, 1.2 million, right? All right, annual. So if we're the owner of the land, and we're getting $1.2 million a year from the ground lease, from the person or group or whatever that's renting or leasing the land from us, how much is that annual cash flow worth to us? Assuming this is going to be kind of like in perpetuity, or in essence kind of just an ongoing relationship with no inherent increases over time. We're just going to make the assumption kind of this flat income. So what else do we need to know? What sort of a rate of return that we are getting or that we are demanding as the owner of the land? So let's just say, as the owner of the land, we desire maybe an 8% annual rate of return. Okay? So based on those pieces of information, how much is that ground lease worth to us as the owner?
Good old word.
15 million.
Okay? So all we're going to do is we're going to take the 1.2 million and we're going to divide it by 8%. And so that's simply saying that the value of that ground lease to us as the owner of the land is basically $15 million. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Very straightforward. Once again, you're just applying a cap rate. All right? Or in this case, an annual rate of return. The downside, obviously, of this, in this particular circumstance, is we're not building in any sort of growth rate associated with this. We're just saying, all right, now forever, you're going to be paying us $1.2 million a year for the next, whatever, 100 years, 200 years, whatever it might be. And, what we obviously may begin to realize is that was not such a great deal, because without any sort of increases built in, you know, that may become an infinitesimally small amount over time, especially not adjusting for inflation, okay? At an absolute minimum, all right? Okay. Thoughts, questions, observations?
Can I just ask, it's the value of the land to the owner is $50 million at the time of signing the
Yeah, I mean,
contract?
yes, at the time of basically engaging in this long-term arrangement. Okay?
This is example of number 2, like ground lease payment capitalization.
Well, okay, one more time. Question? I'm sorry.
So, I just want to know which, example this would work for. Is it
Number
ground lease
2.
payment capitalization?
Yes.
Number 2?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Now, here's another interesting thing about this. Even though this is a simple problem, let's think about another angle to this. That is the value to the owner of the land at the time the ground lease is initiated, okay? And they're happy, in essence, with this 8% return, okay? But what if they decided to actually sell the land to someone else? Now, they're not obligated to sell it for $15 million. Okay? This is what the value is to them. You understand? This is an internal value, okay, to the owner of the property. So somebody else that they sell it to, the only thing that inherently is fixed is what? The dollar amount of the lease payment each year, correct? So, for example, let's say that I'm, once again, the university, and I say, okay, I need $15 million or more right now to be happy with this sort of ground lease, and if I want to sell it, I want to sell it for hopefully something more than $15 million. Well, let's say that I approach you and I say, okay, look, I'm going to give you this cash flow of $1.2 million every year. You own the land, it's yours. How much are you willing to pay me for that? Well, that depends on what sort of rate of return you have. Okay? That let's say that your cost of capital and your hurdle rate is, let's say, 6%. Okay? Well, let's see what would happen. If you find a buyer and their required rate of return or hurdle rate is 6%, then what you're saying, oops, that we could sell the property to you for $20 million. I'm happy as the original owner because I got more than $15 million for the property. I'm selling it to you for $20 million. Theoretically, you're happy because you're getting a 6% rate of return on the money that are in terms of the cash flow. It's a guaranteed income stream, basically forever. So, does everybody understand? Yes? No? Possibly? Okay. So the value, quote unquote, creation that took place here was really more of a situation of where I, as the owner, am demanding a much higher rate of return than what other people that may be in the market may be demanding, okay? And so if I'm demanding an 8% rate of return, but yet the market is willing to accept a 6% rate of return, it makes perfect sense for me to sell the property and pocket the cool $5 million difference on that valuation. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Possibly could be. Okay?
So you're saying that I want to purchase land for 20, that's acceptable for me. I don't want to go no more than...
Yeah, because your required rate of return is 6%. You're getting your 6% on the 1.2 million by paying 20 million.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Okay, any other questions? Moving forward. All right, so this next one, we're going to be taking a look at the net operating income and then the ground lease payment. All right. Let's say that we're trying to kind of separate out the value of the land kind of from the value of the improvements in a ground lease situation, okay? So this is not about money that we're borrowing. This is about simply, for this particular property, we in essence are going to have a land value or the ground lease value, and we're going to have basically the building value, all right? So think of it like this. If we've got a net operating income that the property overall is generating, and let's just say that's $10 million a year. Oops. Of net operating income. But yet, the ground lease payment is $2 million. So what that means, if you want to sort of think of it like this, sort of our adjusted NOI, kind of, is $8 million. Does that make sense? Okay? So what we're really doing is we're saying, okay, the ground lease payment, yeah, $2 million bucks. So whatever's left over of whatever income the property is generating, that adjusted sort of NOI, that's really the value attributed to the improvements, to the building. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Because we've subtracted out
Yes.
what our cost of the land is. Okay? So this is where it's different than a lot of the calculations that we've done in this class, where you automatically assume with the loans and everything else that we've done, that within that loan, what is wrapped up in there? The building value and the land value. Here, we're separating it out, okay? And we're saying, all right, you've got this ground lease that you're paying $2 million a year for, but the overall property is generating $10 million, but then after we subtract out that ground lease, we're left with $8 million, okay? Is everybody on point with what the situation is? Okay, it's not overly complicated, it's just a little bit of a twist, okay? So.
I have a question.
Yep.
I have a question.
Yep.
Why wouldn't you take that $2 million off before, so you had a net operating income?
Well, okay.
There?
The point is, you're taking it off of the income the property is generating, because NOI is reflective of the property's performance as a whole, okay? And so you don't want to distort that by subtracting out the lease payment, the ground lease payment before NOI, because then you're not getting a true NOI on the property, okay? So $10 million is the true NOI on the property, independent of any sort of ground lease, any sort of financing, anything. So you're wanting to keep it separate, okay? And so what we're doing now is we're simply saying we acknowledge that this property is generating $10 million a year, but what we're saying is of that $10 million, $2 million has to go to the owner of the land each and every year. So what we, as the owner of the development, if you will, the owner of the improvements, okay, we are netting $8 million a year, okay? That's our money. And that's what we're ultimately then going to have to figure out what the value is to us. Okay? Now, so let's just say, you know, this is the arrangement, and let's say that this arrangement is good for a number of years, well, kind of like the previous problem. Let's say this is for years 1 to 10. But then, in years 11 to 20,
It's not showing. Oh, sorry.
what?
No, sorry. I didn't see the 1 to 10. I thought it going down.
Okay. So basically in years 11 to 20, let's just say that our NOI grows to 11 million, but our ground lease payment stays the same. Then that means our adjusted NOI goes up to 9 million. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes?
That's saying that a new tenant came in and they're spending more or something, so we're.
Yeah, you've increased your rents, basically for the next, but in this particular instance, we're just sort of saying, for whatever reason, you're keeping your ground lease payment the same. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way, and once again, we can make adjustments. Okay? All right, so, in this particular instance, kind of applying the same methodology that we did previously, all right? And let's say at the end of all of this, let's say that we've got a reversion value or terminal value of, I don't know, let's just say, I'm just going to make up a number, 85 million. All right? So basically, it's going to be the same sort of setup and scenario as the previous problem. And what you're going to also need to know is, well, what is our discount rate that we're going to be using? Oops. In this case, let's say a discount rate of 6%. Okay? Find now the value for the improvements. The improvements only. We're not focused on the land. So in other words, just to kind of simplify things, you basically can ignore NOI and the ground lease payment. All we're really focused on is the adjusted NOI. Okay, so much like the previous problem, you've got one payment per year. Zero as our initial cash flow. And then we've got 8 million as a cash flow that occurs for 10 years. Then we have 9 million, in this case, that occurs for 9 years. And then the final year is going to be the 9 million plus the residual value of 85 million. There's that final cash flow. And then we're gonna have a discount rate of 6%. So what is the overall value? Okay, for the improvements of the building. All right, so let's see what we've got. Okay, and what do you end up with?
122,372,605.
Yep,
0.70.
yep. Okay, make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? All right, moving forward.
It is very cool how you teach that, I have to say.
Oh, I'm sorry?
I think it's actually very cool how you teach that, because over these 8 weeks, we actually managed now to build that up.
All right, now, let's say that, kind of carrying on, and once again, kind of looking at this from the building value. So let's just say we've got an NOI on a property of 1 million, and we've got a ground lease, spelled, ground lease payment of, let's say, 400,000. And that means kind of our adjusted NOI would be 600,000. Okay? So in this case, what's sort of happening? We've got some land that's pretty darn expensive relative to the overall sort of income stream that the property is generating. All right? Compared to the previous problem where, it was like, whatever it was, like 20% or something like that. Here, we're saying, well, it's like 40% of the actual NOI is going toward the ground lease payment. But, whatever, that's okay. So assuming that is the amount, I'm sorry? Question? Okay. So assuming that that is the amount of adjusted NOI that we have coming off of the building, okay, the improvements, and let's say that we've got a required rate of return as an investor in this of, let's say, 8%, then the value of this, in other words, cap rate, is going to be $7.5 million. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
That
So-
is now the improvement.
That would be the value of the improvements, or the value attributed to the improvements, okay? Now, another way to be thinking about these ground leases that I don't think that I mentioned previously is this is also, in some cases, a way for a developer to maybe do a larger deal than they ordinarily would be able to on their own, because to a certain extent they're partnering with basically this large-scale landowner. And so whenever they go to a lender, this is where it potentially can get a little bit tricky, but ultimately, in most cases, the property owner has got to be sort of willing to subjugate their sort of rights and their ownership and so forth, so that in the event of default on the loan by the building developer, then you're going to have the landowner potentially having to step in, pay off the loan, or do whatever to avoid the land and the building being foreclosed on and taken away. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's a risk from the owner's perspective. They could lose the land to, obviously, a lender. But it can also be the case, in some instances, believe it or not, that you may even have the landowner be the lender. Sounds crazy, but it happens because what may be the circumstances is that the landowner has a lot of cash. It's not an issue of them not having a lot of cash. They just don't want to go through the brain damage of actually developing the land themselves, okay? So they're willing to, in essence, partner with somebody to actually get them through the mechanics of the process and let that developer walk away with a developer's return and so forth, and ultimately be the lender on the property. So I mean, there's so many different ways this can be organized and structured. It's really just whatever resources that the landowner may have at their disposal. They may be a partial partner in the deal, could be more of a full partner in the deal. It's like, for example, you could have a situation of where the developer comes in, says, okay, yeah, we're willing to do this long-term ground lease, with you as the owner of the land, and we're willing, above and beyond whatever fixed payment we give you on the ground lease, we will also let you participate in the upside and the equity in the deal, kind of like we talked about last week, the whole equity participation loan, same sort of concept, but here with the landowner being one of the partners in the deal so that they can potentially benefit from the upside. Okay? Make sense? All right. Any questions? Okay, so any other general questions just about ground leases? Anybody? Before we move on.
What's the most the most common term? I mean, we've thrown a bunch of numbers around. You said
I wouldn't say there isn't. I mean, that's the thing.
99 before.
There is no absolute common term with ground leases. In more historic times, I mean, probably the most famous of all was Hong Kong. In essence, Hong Kong was a long-term ground lease, basically like a 99-year lease, from China. And ultimately, obviously, it expired, a handful of years ago. And now look at what has happened in terms of, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but it's an interesting situation because it was a 99-year ground lease, okay? And so, but you can have ground leases as short as a year or less. I mean, I would say the most common, would be for the life or the expected life of whatever the improvements are that you're going to be building on the land is the logical sort of ground lease term. So that as an example, if you're building, I don't know, an apartment community or a dorm or whatever, you sort of say, the expected life of that asset might be 30 years, okay? And after that, you're probably going to either want to tear it down or do major renovations or, whatever. So, under those circumstances, that might be what sort of sets the duration of the ground lease. I mean, this is where it gets really interesting and kind of, exciting as to what you can do with this. But it could also be that, and this is somewhat uncommon, but I have seen it, to where the ground lease, let's say, is 30 years. You build whatever you want to on that ground lease. It exists for 30 years. But at the end of the 30 years, you may be obligated to return the ground in original condition. In other words, demolish everything off of the property. In other words, think of it as the equivalent of you rent a space in a shopping mall, okay? You rent a white box, okay, that basically is nothing more than, you know, 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor, okay? And then you do whatever tenant improvements over the term of your lease, but at the expiration of your lease, in many cases, especially for retail, you are required to return that space back to its original state of basically just a big white box. Does that make sense? Well, the same thing can be true of the ground lease. That the owner, you know, just basically is saying, I don't want the responsibility of having to demolish this thing after 30 years. That's your responsibility. So you have to build that into, you know, whatever model that, you know, you have in the execution of this. That because the way that you have to think about it as the owner of the improvements is that you have to get whatever you're going to get out of this from the income that it generates over that lease term, whatever that lease term is. Does that make sense? Because after that, you're going to get no income as the owner of the improvements, not the land. Okay? Questions? Okay? Moving forward. All right, let's do this. I'm going to try to use Excel here for a second. Let's see if the technology is going to let me. Okay, are you guys in Zoom land seeing an Excel empty spreadsheet?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so just as an example, kind of a couple of the different ones that we sort of worked through. So, excuse me. So let's just create a very simple little model here. All right. 20 years. Okay. So let's say that we've got this 20-year duration on this loan, or on this ground lease. And so you've got the numbers. So like one of the examples, like the very first example we gave, how much was the ground lease payment?
$1 million.
Was it 1 million?
$1 million
Okay.
for the first years.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna just make that all right. And let's see if I can copy that down. Okay. So $1 million a year for 10 years. Yes? Yes?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And then it went up to what, 1.5 million?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then in the final year, it was basically the 1.5 million plus what was the reversion value?
15 million.
15 million, okay. All right. So here are our cash flows. Let me see if I can, what I need, there we go. View, zoom to, let's say, one. I can fit it all on screen. Close, okay. All right, so let's just say that, once again, what we're wanting to do is to calculate the net present value on this. All right, so it would just be as simple as this. NPV, and then what was our discount rate that we used on that one?
7%.
7%, so 0.07. And then we simply capture the value starting in period 1 all the way through period 20. Close parentheses, and so now do we match up? Look back in your notes, I don't have it right here in front of me.
No.
This should be for problem
Yeah,
number one.
right.
Wow. I have 12 million.
You muted it.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, correct, okay. So this should be the first problem we did. In other words, with the, once again, with the reversion value.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. Does that make sense, everybody? So very straightforward,
Yep.
you know, just in terms of, you know, using Excel. You're obviously welcome to use Excel as well on the quiz. All right. I think all of the others are basically just slight variations, so there really is nothing, I guess, else new to show you in Excel as it relates to that. But I just wanted to kind of show you real quickly that is one way to do it. All right, I'll go back to my other screen if I can. Okay. Stop share. Okay. All right. So now we'll work through all of these are kind of going to be basic sort of review of what we have done over the course of the semester. So what I'm trying to tell you, this will probably be the easiest quiz of the semester. That's a good thing, okay? So, you know, hopefully you maybe, you know, if you're kind of right there teetering on the edge with respect to your score and whatever, this hopefully maybe will push you up so you don't necessarily have to take the final exam. So, that having been said, just realize these next few are probably going to be relatively straightforward. All right, so one of the things that I talked about earlier today, but also we have done a number of these kind of calculations, is to go through and, in essence, to excuse me, to calculate basically like a cap rate on the property. But let's throw in a couple of little extra things. All right, so let's assume that you go and you find some land, kind of like what I was talking about today, like a property tax sale, okay? And let's say that you're able to buy that land for, okay, give me a dollar amount. Just raw land. And let's say that we're talking about, let's just say, I don't know, an acre of land, 1 acre of land.
1.5.
How much?
1.5.
1.5 million? Sure, we can go down that road. That's going to be pretty pricey, okay? Let's just say, in this particular case, we're talking about more of a rural area, okay? Not necessarily, you know.
200,000.
Yeah, I would even go, let's just go with,
300,000.
let's go with 20,000. Okay?
Wow.
This is Texas,
That's what
okay? This is Texas. This is not
Good
Florida,
answer.
okay? And this is also small town Texas, where, you know, I won't get into, I was going to say something funny, but whenever I do that, I get myself in trouble. So, all right, so $20,000 an acre, and in this particular case, let's just say, so this is what we bought it for. All right, so on that $20,000 purchase, this is sort of the purchase price, we're going to have holding cost on land, predominantly the only real holding cost is property taxes, okay? If you pay cash, all right? So your only real holding costs are going to be property tax. Now, you also, yes, you could get insurance, you know, in the event that obviously somebody falls and hurts themselves or whatever on the land, but once again, Texas is not as litigious as Florida is, so it's not as much of an issue, okay? So let's say that our property taxes are about 3.5% of the value of this purchase. So let's say 20,000 times 3.5%, so $700 a year. In property taxes. Okay? Everybody with me so far?
Yep.
All right, now, so let's say that we want to do basically a ground lease or just a lease of the land in general to someone. But maybe, in the case of one of the properties I bought, basically somebody may want to use it, and actually currently is, although illegally currently because they've been doing it without an owner there, but that's a whole other story. But let's just say they want to store vehicles and trailers and whatever else on this raw piece of land. And so let's say that you could get $300 a month in rental income off of the land. All right? So let's just sort of start off and kind of work through some kind of basic sort of calculations on this. So, how much am I going to generate a year in income?
300 times 12.
Okay, so we'll start with that. So, $3,600 a year of basically gross income. And let's say the only expense is going to be the $700 a year in property taxes. That's going to leave us with $2,900 a year in basically the equivalent of net operating income. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? So this is, once again, an oversimplified example on purpose to illustrate the concept, okay? And here we're just talking about land. All we're renting is the land. There's no, nothing else, okay? No utilities, and like maintenance would be mowing the grass, if it's grass, okay? And that would be covered, let's say, by the tenant, okay? All right? So, if that's the case, and you paid cash for this, what's your rate of return?
Hey, Fred.
Yeah.
Stacy's Zoom just kicked her off. Do you mind if she gets back on somehow?
Okay.
It said session expired for some reason.
That's weird.
Yeah, I'm still on. I see everybody else on.
Okay. I mean, the recording should still be there.
Recording.
Yeah, it's still recording, so it's still active.
Oh, okay.
So, okay. So in essence, this $2,900 represents net operating income. The value was $20,000. So what does that mean? Basically, the rate of return or the cap rate is. $14.5%. Yes?
Yep.
Okay, does everybody see that? Okay, now, so think about this for a second. And let's assume, now, this is a relatively small dollar amount in the scheme of things in terms of the purchase price of the property and the income generated off of it and so forth. But let's focus for a moment on the cap rate. 14.5% annual rate of return. I think most of us would say that's a very reasonable rate of return. Yes? Okay?
Yep.
Now, what I will tell you is the property that I bought is generating actually closer to a 40% rate of return after you actually look at what the income relative to what I paid for it. But in this case, this is still really good, 14.5%. Now, but the thing that you probably should focus on a little bit is say, okay, yeah, this is a small investment, a small, dollar amount, sort of rate of return and so forth. In other words, no one is gonna, I don't know, live or exist off of this. You're gonna have to do multiple of these in order to basically build almost like a portfolio if you're gonna make this work in terms of, from an investment perspective. But now here's the other aspect that one has to maybe wrap their head around. That, and this is, I think, a lesson lost on a lot of folks. What could you do with this property? You could build on the property. You could build a house. You could build maybe a duplex. You could build a quadplex. You could build, you know, whatever. Given its zoning. Or, once again, you leave it for storage. My point is, if you were to build a building on this, whatever that building, whatever form that building takes, the question is, after construction cost, after all the brain damage that you went through to develop that building might not throw off a 14.5% rate of return. It might only throw off, let's just say half that. Okay, let's say 7.25%. Okay, let's say hypothetically. So then you've got to begin to ask yourself the question from an investment point of view. What do I do? Because your rate of return may actually go down by actually building improvements on the property, but what will go up is what? The overall cash flow.
NOI.
Yeah, because you're going to be generating something much, hopefully, if you build a house or a quadplex or whatever, you're hopefully going to be generating a higher rate of return than just simply $300 a month. Hopefully you're going to be maybe, you know, generating, if it's a, let's just say a quadplex, each unit is, in this little small town, will be, you know, $600 or $700 a month, you know, in rental income. So, you know, there it becomes a little bit of a different scenario as to, you know, the valuation of this, because, yeah, you're going to generate more NOI, but you're also going to have to spend more to improve the property, more in terms of you know, just additional risk and development cost. Okay, does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yep.
Now, okay, now another way to begin to kind of think about this is, you know, what is, you know, what's sort of your objective, you know, in this? Are you looking for passive income, you know, where you're basically getting mailbox money? And obviously with rental of land, it's pretty much mailbox money. What's going to go wrong, you know, as opposed to, you know, you build a house, you build a quadplex, you build whatever, and if you're the owner, you're going to be responding to property management related calls and concerns and things like that. So that's another aspect of all of this that you have to kind of step back and sort of think about. So with that, just kind of general setup and so forth, any questions? Nope. Okay. All right. Okay, so another little metric that we might use in an example like this, what's a simple metric, what's the payback period in terms of years and months? In other words, you just strictly look at it as cash out the door at the beginning, and then cash in the door each year. How long would it take you to basically just pay yourself back? Not an actual rate of return, but just simply how long of a period, not taking into consideration sort of time value of money, just simply looking at it as cash out, cash in. Everybody follow? All right, so how long is it going to take?
6.89 years.
Okay, so all you're really doing is you're taking the overall value of $20,000 and you're basically dividing it by the 2,900 NOI, because because you do have to subtract out the property taxes. So in other words, it's whatever income, net income the property is generating. So 2,900, so basically 20,000 divided by 2,900.
And where's those water flying?
6.90.
So you get basically 6.89 years. And if you want to multiply that by 12, it would be the equivalent of 82.7576 months. Okay?
And what is the number?
It's just simply a payback period. It's just a simple payback period. Okay? So, all we're really saying with that is it's not anything magical, mystical, and this doesn't require any sort of time value of money or any sort of special skill. We're just simply saying, hey, we just gave away $20,000 in cash, and we're going to get net each year $2,900. How long is it going to take for basically to just simply replenish our funds? 6.89 years, or basically 82 months. Okay, does that make sense? Yes? Now the reason for just doing something simple like this, and the key words were to like replenish our funds. In other words, to say, okay, assuming that this was all the money we have in the world, kind of thing, is $20,000, and we in essence are simply wanting to do this kind of investment maybe over and over again, then it's going to take us almost 7 years to build up the complete capital to do another cash investment just like this one. Does that make sense? So obviously, in a perfect world, in a perfect situation, we would want this payback period to be as short as possible, okay? To where, it's going to be maybe, I don't know, maybe half that time, okay? And, under those circumstances, then that allows us to do that much more, okay? All right, any questions? Pretty straightforward, yes? Almost too straightforward. Okay. Okay, so let's say that we complicate the same little problem up, and we say that maybe at the end of, 5 years, we decide we're going to sell it. So at end of year 5, we sell the property for, let's say, $25,000. Okay? So based on everything that I've given you, calculate an internal rate of return.
Again, the cash flow.
So you're going to need it. Well, you don't have to do it as a cash flow because obviously the cash flows are constant. So you could do it just simply as present value, future value, but you can do it as a cash flow. So let's see what you get. Okay, when have you got an answer, let me know.
I got 17.99.
Okay, so let's just see. All right, so one payment per year. We could do this, once again, as just present value, future value. So we could say, all right, we spent $20,000. As a cash outflows for our present value, and we sell the property for $25,000, which is going to be income to us as our future value. We have a 5-year holding period. And we have a $2,900 a year positive income or payment that we are receiving. So, what is, in essence, our rate of return? Okay. I believe somebody already said 17.99%. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got it.
Okay. All right. Any questions up to this point? All right. Now, let's introduce a little bit of additional complexity. Let's say that we have a hurdle rate or discount rate, oops, of, I don't know, 7%. Calculate the net present value for this deal.
Bless you.
Once again, see if you can do it on your own. You can do it a couple different ways. There's a shortcut, but we're going to go ahead and show you the normal way that you're going to probably want to approach it. And so let's just say we go back to one payment per year. We put in, oops, 20,000 as our negative first cash flow. We put in 2,900 as a cash flow for 4 years. We put in 2,900 plus 25,000 as our final cash flow. We put in 7% as our discount rate, and we solve for net present value. Okay? Let's try it that way first. So you should end up with 97, 15, 23. Okay, so let's review what that actually means. We've covered this before, but I want to make sure this is locked in your brain. Okay, what does that mean? What does this number, 97, 15, 23? That is our net present value, yes, but what does it mean? What is it? Someone want to take a chance?
That's the value that it is to me today.
No.
No, that's the value if you had 7% return.
Sort of. Okay.
It has to be more than that to be interesting for you.
Not necessarily. Okay, let's make sure, no one's giving me what I'm sort of viewing as being the right answer for what this means. Okay, how much did we pay for it?
20,000.
$20,000. Okay, and we've included that in our cash flow calculations, yes? Yes? Bob our heads up and down, yes, we've included that in our cash flow. Okay, so what we're getting whenever we put in this 7% discount rate, we're getting this 97.15. What that is saying to us is we could have spent $29,000, in other words, this plus this, and we would have met our 7% discount rate. Okay? Does that make sense? So in other words, we've spent $20,000 and we're getting basically, okay, here's the thing to sort of remove is go back over here for a second. What is the investment actually generating in terms of an internal rate of return? 17%, or almost, well, 18%, 17.99, okay? That's what it's generating. But what we're saying is, okay, we get that, but what we want to know is, in essence, if we have a hurdle rate of 7%, how much more could we have spent on this and still be happy, so to speak, with our 7% rate of return? In other words, we're getting our 7% rate of return, but on top of that, we're getting another 9,700. If you combine those two, the 7% plus the 9,700, that in essence, theoretically, would be the 18%. Okay? In other words, part of this 18% is the 7%. The remainder is basically the 9,700 expressed in dollars. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, another way of looking at it is simply, let me twist it around another way here for a second. What if we take this original situation and we were to put in 7% here and resolve for present value? See what happens.
Come up with 29,715.23.
Anybody see what's going on here?
Yep, the other 20,000 is the 10%.
Yeah, so basically, what this is doing, we're solving, we're basically replacing the original 20,000 because now we're saying we're only getting the 7% return. So the reality is we could have paid up to $29,000 and we would have gotten our 7% rate of return. In other words, because you see, that's the same as that, and then the other 20,000 is that. So in other words, 20,000 plus the 9,000 net present value now becomes what we could have paid for the property if our required rate of return or our hurdle rate were only 7%. Does that make sense? Yes or no? But now the reality is, how much did we actually pay? $20,000.
$20,000.
Okay, so we paid $20,000, we're actually getting an 18% return, but what we're saying is, okay, here's another way of looking at this. We are super duper happy with 18%. Ecstatic about 18%. But internally within our organization, what we're saying is, as long as the investment gets above our hurdle rate of 7%, we're satisfied. Okay? So there's a difference between being satisfied and super duper happy. Okay? Satisfied is 7%. Super duper happy is everything above and beyond, really 7%. Does that make sense? Okay? So this investment is giving us an actual, 17.99 or 18% rate of return, but what we're saying is, all right, we only require 7%. Therefore, if we only require 7%, then we could have actually paid more for the property up front. And in this case, we could have paid $9,000 more for the property and still achieved our 7% required rate of return. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Possibly could be. Okay? All right. All right, that's it. So we got one more little thing, and we're done, at least in terms of lecture. Okay. So, we're done with calculations, unless you bring up something that requires me to do another calculation. So, from your perspective, and obviously I'll get to take a look at what you said in the course evaluations here. Last time I looked, and I think this was the final count, sadly, I think it was like 87% response rate from the class. So several people did not respond to doing the course evaluations. So that just means that if you did the course evaluation, you're going to get a point. So sorry about that, but I'm going to look again just to double check. But last time I looked, it was 87%. Okay.
What is the deal you made with this? Wasn't it like, if you got 100%?
Well, it was basically if you reached 90%, you got 2 points. If you reached 100% participation, it was 3 points. So basically, if one more person had filled out the course evaluations, you'd have gotten 2 points, and then however many others, like 3 or 4, that didn't fill it out.
Did somebody drop the class?
No, it wasn't that.
Unbelievable.
It happens. Well, I mean, okay, look as an example.
Are you,
Here's just real quickly, look at this. How many people are in the room? How many are on Zoom? You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. There are 25 people enrolled in this class. So basically there's 6 people that aren't here right now, okay? All right.
I need those names.
Well, figure it out.
let me,
Okay, moving forward. All right.
Point.
Question? I'm sorry? Question?
Not even in class?
You can do as a class to make up those additional points.
I don't know. Look,
Please.
at this point, it is what it is. Okay, moving on. All
I'm
right.
not even in attending class.
Give the additional points to the people that are in class,
I have
the
a
people
question
that are not
about,
here.
Yeah, not attend class.
did you only count the people who sent you back a,
No,
response?
no.
Or did you count the actual?
What, there is a report that is generated by the university as course evaluations are received. It tells you, here's how many course evaluations have been received and what percentage of the course evaluations have been received. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
After they don't attend class?
I'm sorry, question? Max?
Yeah, how could you not attend class?
Well, you watched the video, I guess.
If they're just watching the recordings, they probably canceled out of the recording right before you said anything about the extra credit.
Well, that's their fault, okay? All right, moving on. So,
Tough luck.
top lessons learned. Okay, so over the course of this semester, you've been exposed to a pretty wide variety of things as it relates to real estate finance. And then many of you are going to be rolling over into the real estate investments course, where we get into more on the investor side of things and more tax issues and more deal structure issues and kind of partnership arrangements and whatnot. But in this course, you know, what we've tried to do is expose you to a variety of different mortgage products that are on offer in one way or another, from whether it's traditional lenders or other sort of, you know, private equity lenders or individuals. Also, you know, have looked at, you know, different sources of financing, you know, whether it's through mezzanine finance, whether it's through using commercial mortgage-backed securities, you know, whatever it might be. We've looked at, obviously, how to do a variety of return calculations for both the investor as well as for the lender in terms of their rates of return and kind of how they go about making money. We've looked at, you know, obviously as we did today, ground leases. You know, we've looked at obviously some basic sort of Excel models and a couple of little, you know, things there with mortgage applications. So I think we've covered a pretty fair amount of stuff, obviously, you know, in this course. My question to you, and I'm asking for honesty, is what do you think were the top 1 or 2 or 3 things from this course were the lessons learned? And so I'm just going to take a list here of maybe the top 10 of what you give me. So we'll start with the 3 folks that are in the room. All right. Any of you, which one of you, what you feel like for you was a top lesson learned?
I guess
Chris?
like financial leverage and how it can be used to increase like a profit margin in terms of the lender's perspective.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm gonna say the effective cost of borrowing.
Okay. All right.
Everything on
Evaluation.
Well, hold on. We got someone here in the room.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
More the evaluation of the property in terms when the interest rates go up and down, what it makes the
Okay.
value of the property.
All right. All right. Now, the 3 people in the room have spoken, so now we're off to Zoom land.
Capital structure.
Okay.
I think amortization and annuity is a big lesson.
Just the different types of loans that are out there and how they're structured, pros and cons, the interesting lesson.
The internal rate of investment, like the rate of return on investment, everything that happens with that.
Okay. Once again, you're a bit muffled. So, okay. Can somebody else out there say?
Yeah, he said the rate of return on an investment.
Oh, the rate on an investment?
Yeah, the rate of return on investment.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Tax shielding. Useful.
Yes, and for 2 more credit points, debt deal. Since we got 100% participation.
All right.
For the
Okay.
kids who actually come to class.
All right. Anything else?
Can I really really basic, how to use the financial calculator.
Okay?
I would also say, like, you know, that time value of money, and yeah, we should be understanding that, how that impacts.
Yeah, I agree. All PM problems are pretty basic and necessary.
Now,
And the weighted cost of capital, that was something that was tough for me.
okay, so capital structure and weighted average cost of capital, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna,
Banker.
well, sorry, what? Adam?
It's good to be a banker.
It's good to be a banker. Excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna single one person out in Zoomland for a specific reason. They don't know anything about this. We have one student in the class that is also doing a law degree. And I am curious as to their perspective. This is Rainier. And I'm curious as to your perspective on, you've obviously, you're you know, knee-deep into law school and that sort of thing, and you've obviously chosen to take this class. And I'm sort of curious about your perspective as to maybe what insights, if any, that maybe you got out of this that are maybe different from some of the other folks because of your background and your perspective being in the law school.
Yeah, so I'm also, my undergrad degree was in finance.
Right.
So some of this is kind of, you know, the same.
Right.
But speaking from a real estate perspective, it's all kind of different because all my classes are law. But I really liked this course, and it's really, I think it's going to be really practical stuff that we can use in our practice every day.
Yeah. So, I mean, from a you know, kind of a legal sort of, I guess, perspective as it relates to sort of, you know, real estate law is an interesting practice in and of itself. I mean, is that kind of the direction that you sort of see yourself going in terms of real estate law or land use law or something totally different?
Yeah, I totally want to do real estate law here in South Florida.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's tremendous opportunity there. So, okay, good. All right. Anybody else? Any other sort of
Operating the property,
what, I'm sorry?
PGI, operating property and PGI and all that.
Oh, okay. So the operating statement aspect. Okay.
Dr. Forty, I think also too, your ability to kind of give us some real life examples was also a big help in this class.
Okay. All right, so examples. Okay. All right, so that I think gives us a nice little laundry list. So hopefully this was not a waste of your time for the past 8 weeks. I certainly don't think it was a waste of my time for the last 8 weeks. I enjoyed it as I normally do. All right. Anything else before I'm going to show you a couple of little things on the internet, and then after that we are done. Okay. So any other sort of general questions, observations before we kind of move on to a couple of things I want to show you.
We covered Excel too.
Yep. Obviously a few little Excel things. Okay. So let's switch over.
Can I ask another question?
I'm sorry.
One more question.
Can I ask another question?
Go ahead.
I don't want to belabor this, but you know, everyone who submitted, you know, the evaluation, we put a lot of time into it. We sent out a lot of email. Is there any way that you would be considerate to giving us maybe 2 additional questions on the test as extra credit for everybody who's on Zoom or in the class?
Look, I understand where you're coming from. Okay, here's the way this is going to work. Let's just lay this out there. At the end of today, if you will obviously know what your quiz grades are up to this point. My advice to you would be to today, you're going to have plenty of time to do it, because we're going to finish here probably in about 10 to 15 minutes. So you're going to be able to start the quiz and finish it before. I know many of you have the GIS course or whatever after this, but you can finish the quiz. It's a really easy quiz today, okay, by comparison. then you're done, okay? Once you're done, then what I want you to do is just email me and say, hey, if you can't figure it out for whatever reason on your own in terms of the calculations, where do I stand? What grade am I going to receive? That sort of thing, okay? And you can individually sort of, do that, and then I'll kind of reply back and say, okay, yeah, here's where you stand, here's what sort of grade you have. But until you complete, obviously, quiz number 8, I'm not going to do that. You follow? That makes sense? Yes or no?
Yes.
Bob your head, yes, up and down.
Yes.
So now you still have until Monday night to do the quiz. My advice is do it now, get it over with, okay? And then I can sort of tell you, okay, you've got an A, you've got a B, you've got, an A minus, whatever, all right? And then you can say, okay, I'm done, I'm out of here, nothing else. If you're not happy with your grade, then we'll proceed with the discussion of, okay, you're going to take the comprehensive final, all right? And obviously, that's going to be a beast, and that's going to be basically 80 questions, and you've got until basically Friday of this next week to complete it, so much like the midterm, okay? So, that's where we are, all right, in terms of that. Any questions?
So that extra point comes out.
I'm sorry, Jim?
Right after class, so we could review the notes, so we could take the test later.
Okay, well, Jim, I'm sorry. Once again, you're muffled here. I mean, could anybody in Zoom land?
You can upload the video immediately after class, so that we can review it.
I upload. Okay, let me explain what happens with the videos. For the Zoom video, it takes literally, and I'm not exaggerating, it takes typically 6 to 8 hours for its process within Canvas to be basically uploaded to Canvas via the Zoom app, okay? The other video, the video that I record, I upload to YouTube. That video typically takes a few hours to also upload and process, okay? So I do both of those instantly, okay? But it typically means they're not available until either late Saturday night or early Sunday morning, okay? So I promise you, it is not me sitting back and saying, oh, I'm going to wait a few days to upload the video. That is just the nature of how long, I mean, for those of you that have ever uploaded videos that are long videos, like 4 hours, 3 hours, or whatever it is, it just takes a long time for them to process within the system, okay? So I promise you, it's not an issue of me sitting around, because I literally go from the classroom to my office to upload, okay? All right, any other questions?
Yeah, just a question. I know on like past quizzes, when the high score in the class would be like a 9,
Yep.
it would sometimes give us the extra point.
Yep.
I think on quiz 6, the high was a 9. Would you consider giving us a point on that quiz?
I've got to look back at it, but I have done that consistently on all the quizzes. So if there was only a couple of quizzes where that was the case, and in both cases I gave that extra point.
I think on quiz 6.
I mean, I'll look, but what I'm saying is I'm pretty sure that I did that already.
Okay.
Dr. Forgy, the quiz 7 solutions, I don't think I got them this week. Usually I go back and look through it and make sure I have the right answers to these. I mean, obviously, a couple of them I don't have the right answers, so I wanted to take a look to see how they were processed.
Okay, I can get those posted. All right, anything else?
Thank you.
Okay, all right. So a couple of quick little things and then we're done. It's kind of just to show you. Let's see here.
Basically, you will have to grade the last quiz very fast.
Let's see here. What I'm going to show you is just an example of what I was sort of talking about in terms of opportunities, and this kind of integrates some of the things that you're doing with GIS. Okay, so this is in actuality where I went and looked for information about some particular property tax sales and that sort of thing, all in Texas, but very similar sorts of things exist in Florida, but just want to kind of show you a couple of quick little things that are kind of interesting as it relates to GIS systems, but also property tax related information. So let's say, in this case, we want to do Jones Street. This is not one of the properties I purchased, but this is an interesting little example. So one of the things that this system for this particular county does, and a lot of counties have this, and it's kind of a cool thing, is it's an integrated GIS system with their property tax system, and this is Grimes County in Texas. And what you can do is you can put in an owner's name, you can put in a property address, whatever it might be, and then what it will do, there we go, it will pull up then the actual parcel and all the surrounding parcels. So let's kind of zoom out here for a second. So once again, this is in Grimes County, this little, oh God, why must everything be problematic? Maybe I won't show you this, okay. You can actually pull this up on your own computers at home, grimescad.org. So what it will do, like this particular parcel, is one that I was looking at, I didn't actually buy. And what it does is it shows the owner, but then you can click on the property information, you click on the person, and then it will show, for example, the property taxes that have been paid recently for the previous years. This was a foreclosure sale. Somebody else bought it in a sale back in March. But it also then shows, okay, the ownership of the property, all the previous year's sort of tax bills, how much has been paid, that sort of thing. But one of the interesting things that you can do whenever you're back here at the map is, and this is where GIS is just amazing, is that you can say, well, okay, who owns this parcel immediately adjacent to it? Or this parcel over here. And then once again, by clicking on the information, you say, okay, the city of Navasota owns that. Here is kind of the basic information about the property, the valuation, you know, so forth, so on. And then, so that's what's available for the appraisal district. And then once again, similar sorts of things exist here. Another kind of interesting tool that exists is usually at the county clerk's level. So in this case, like if you go to Grimes County Clerk, I'm just pulling this up because this is one I just happen to be familiar with because I've been playing around with it quite a bit. But you can go down here and do an online records search. And same general thing. In here, that particular property, I just happen to remember it. All right. And so you can see, all right, this is whenever it last basically changed hands was in 2020, back in March, and it was a sheriff's deed, which is basically what happens, once again, in a tax lien foreclosure sale. But what's interesting is you can click on it, and there's the actual deed itself. And what's interesting is then you can also go in, and if you blow this up a little bit, you can see they paid $2,000 for it. okay? And, you know, so once again, a relatively simple sort of interface to be able to kind of see, okay, and then now you're sort of saying, well, how do you find out about the properties that are potentially up for sale? All right, so that's another, in this case, website that if you were to type in this case, Grimes County tax sales, and say October 6th. Okay, so in this case, you've got a, let's see, this is the one. So yeah, so like this is the one that I went to as an example. This was this past Tuesday. And so it has all the details about the actual sale itself, what you as a bidder potentially have to provide. And then it lists out each of the properties, has the identifying sort of number that you can trace back into the property tax systems. But what's interesting here is then you can see for each of these properties that basically it's all the appraisal district against whoever the current listed owner is. And then over here on the right-hand side, you can see, okay, what the minimum bid to be offered is. And then the ones that have withdrawn are basically what's happened there is somebody at the very, very last minute paid their taxes off. Okay, so that it wouldn't go through the property tax foreclosure sale. But it's just kind of an interesting thing that, once again, every month counties do this, you know, all over, not only just Texas, but elsewhere. And, you know, and it is a way to potentially find some interesting opportunities to potentially purchase. So anyway, that was just kind of a quick little extra because I thought you might just find it interesting, but it also shows the value of like a county GIS system where that now you can kind of go in, you pick a particular property that you're interested in, and then you can see who all the owners are around it. Are there other ones that are potentially delinquent in their taxes that might be potential purchase options and so forth, so on. Anyway, just thought it was kind of a fun thing for you to potentially play around with if you choose to do so. Okay, with that, I am done. And I will, at this point, I guess we'll just go ahead and close everything down and go ahead and you can work on your quiz, and I'll try to get the solutions posted for quiz 7 here relatively soon. Okay? Anything else?
Thank you, Professor.
Absolutely. And just out of curiosity, I mean, obviously many of you in Zoom land have your cameras turned off, but I mean, how many, I mean, I can look on the class roll, but most of you were enrolled in the investments class, yes?
Yes.
Most of you? Okay, good. All right, well then we'll see you next week. I'll be posting more stuff about that class, obviously, in the next few days. Okay? Okay. All right.
You want a couple minutes or 1 minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to clear up a note that I didn't write down fully yet.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm done. So whenever you're ready, let me know.
All right.